All right, class, coming back at you again for the last part of Chapter 1. In the last video, we stopped right after we talked about the Commerce Clause, which I'm confident you still have some questions about. It can be confusing, but we will talk about that more in class. We will watch that video in case you haven't already had a chance to watch it, and we'll really talk more about the Commerce Clause, what it means then, what it means now, kind of relate it to some real-life current events. So it should be interesting. But moving on to the last part of Chapter 1, talking next, and this is on the third page of your lecture outline, talking about the Supremacy Clause. All right, this is found in Article 6, which if you're doing Roman numerals is a V and an I, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution. So Supremacy Clause found in Article 6, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution. It states, and this is point A, the Supremacy Clause states that the United States Constitution, laws, and treatises are, and I quote, the supreme law of the land. Okay, the Supremacy Clause states that the U.S. Constitution, laws, and treatises are the supreme law of the land. It's the highest, it is the ranking supreme law of the land when we talk about the U.S. Constitution and our federal laws. So point B, what that means, and this is the first blank, a word called preemption. Preemption. Preemption is the doctrine under which federal law preempts or takes precedent over, which is Precedent, over conflicting state or local laws. So preemption is the doctrine under which federal laws preempt or take precedent over conflicting state or local laws. What that means is since our federal laws are the supreme law of the land, nothing below them, meaning the state or local laws, can conflict with what they say. Now, you know, a lot of arguments are how they fit together. Is this conflicting with it? Is this filling in a blank? Is this interpreting it? But at the end of the day, judges have to make that decision. Is it trying to preempt that federal law, or is it filling in a hole, filling in a blank, ruling on something that the federal government hasn't ruled on or can't rule on? But at the end of the day, federal law, U.S. Constitution, supreme law of the land. All right, so getting into the U.S. Constitution, you're probably very familiar with the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments, that's your first blank there, the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. That's the Bill of Rights. So we're going to quickly go over those and their important protections that are found within the Bill of Rights. So point A, what is the Bill of Rights? Bill of Rights is a series of protections, that's the blank, a series of protections for individuals against various types of government action. All right, so the Bill of Rights, it's a series, amendments 1 through 10, of protections for individuals against various types of government action. So in the Bill of Rights, in those first 10 amendments, there are protections that people raise all the time to say that the government can or cannot do something that it's trying to do, because that's a protection that we're entitled to as people, as citizens of the United States, pursuant to the Bill of Rights. All right, so point B is the First Amendment, the very, very popular First Amendment. All right, Amendment number 1. It guarantees, and I'm going to go through all the blanks, guarantees the freedom of religion. That's your first blank. Speech, that's your second blank, and the press, Press. It guarantees the freedom of religion, speech, and the press, as well as the right to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government. All right, it guarantees the freedom of religion, speech, and the press, as well as the right to peaceably assemble and to petition the government. So I'm confident that you've heard the First Amendment raised by somebody as their rights and their rights potentially being violated. You see it all the time, especially in this day and age, given social media and people's ability to speak out on issues, the ability of the press to speak out on issues, the right to peaceably assemble with the protests that have been going on across the United States. So the First Amendment, it's a pretty hot topic at all times. So looking more into the freedom of speech, point I. Freedom of speech, which is obviously one of the most important guarantees given to individuals under the First Amendment. So point A, this protection includes corporate political speech. The protection includes corporate political speech and symbolic speech. So we're not just talking about a person's ability to speak freely on an issue, but it includes corporate political speech, meaning corporations they are guaranteed the freedom of speech, and symbolic speech. What do I mean by symbolic speech? I mean a t-shirt for a candidate. I mean symbolism, something that symbolizes something that you believe in. That's protected speech. It's not words, but that symbol that stands for something is just as protected. Point B, and here there's no blanks, but it's something I want you to be aware of. It's the compelling government interest test. What that means is if the government is going to try to implement something that would restrict your freedom of speech, then they have to have a convincing reason for passing any law that restricts those rights. Okay, so the compelling government interest test. So again, if the government's going to pass any law that puts a restriction on your First Amendment rights, like the freedom of speech, then they have to have a convincing reason for doing that. For example, this is one you'll always hear, you can't scream fire in a movie theater. Well, why not? Well, because if you do, and there's not really a fire, you can't just say, oh, freedom of speech, I got to yell fire in the movie theater. No, because what that does is that causes a ruckus. That causes concern. That causes everybody to run all at once. It causes injury. It causes all kinds of things. So that's a situation where your freedom of speech might be restricted for a convincing reason by the government because they have other interest in mind, like people's safety. That's a lot of times where the restrictions on the First Amendment and your freedom of speech come in, is people's safety versus your right to petition, your right to protest, your right to speak up. So you'll see that that's just where it gets really, really hairy. Okay, point C, commercial speech. Although it's protected, it may be restricted. So that's the first blank there. Commercial speech may be restricted. So what you need to remember is commercial speech is protected under the First Amendment, but that protection is just not going to be as broad or as extensive as an individual's freedom of speech. Okay, and that's because they're making a profit off of it. So where there's money involved, it's, commercial speech, it's going to be protected. You have the right to say what you want, but you may not get as many protections as an individual does when they raise their First Amendment rights. And then last, point D, some speech is just not going to be protected at all. Slander, otherwise sometimes known as defamation or libel, porn, things like that, you can't just raise your right of, my First Amendment rights of freedom of speech. No, some speech is just absolutely not going to be protected, and those are a couple of examples. All right, moving on, freedom of religion, point number 2 there, which is also a huge component of the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights. First off, point A, the Establishment Clause. Again, there's no blanks, but I kind of want to explain that to you. The Establishment Clause, that's going to prohibit the government from establishing any type of state-sponsored religion. So that's why the government can't come out in support of one religion over the other, because under the Establishment Clause, the government cannot force the establishment of any certain type of state-sponsored religion. All right, at the same time, point B, the Free Exercise Clause. That prohibits the government from compelling anyone to do something or not do something that would be contrary to their beliefs. This is where we see a lot of concerns with certain religions that wear headdressing. Okay, well, for security purposes, when can the government require you to remove that? Can they ever require you to remove that? So again, you'll see that's where it gets hairy. That's why we have attorneys. That's why we have judges. That's why we get paid to make arguments one way or the other every day. But under the free exercise clause, you have to be able to exercise your religion. And the government, they're going to have a compelling reason for forcing you to do something or not do something that's contrary to your religious beliefs. All right, moving on. Point C, Second Amendment. I know this is a hot one as well. The right to keep and bear arms, ARMS. Second Amendment, to keep and bear arms. These next ones I'm going to kind of go through pretty quickly. Point D, Amendment number 4, the Fourth Amendment. It prohibits unreasonable search and seizure of of person or property. Amendment 4 prohibits unreasonable search and seizure of persons or property. We will talk about this more in our criminal law chapter, where we talk about what kind of cause officers have to have before they can search your property, how far can they search it, that kind of thing. We'll talk about that more in the criminal law chapter. Fifth Amendment, point E, guarantees the rights to due process of law. You have your right to day in court. You have your right to due process of law, meaning you can't be stripped of your rights without your opportunity for your day in court. Sixth Amendment, that's point F, guarantees the right to a speedy trial with the assistance of counsel. COUNSEL, guarantees the right to a speedy trial with assistance of counsel. You will notice in parentheses, I have criminal. It guarantees you the right to a speedy criminal trial. There is absolutely nothing speedy about a civil trial. Remember, civil's person versus person, person versus company, over money, usually, civil matters. When it comes to criminal, though, you have the right to a speedy trial. So you're not sitting in jail all this time or out on bond or on house arrest, whatever it may be, only to be, completely acquitted and found not guilty of your charges. Civil trials, though, they take years. And it's why a lot of people settle, because they can't afford to keep a case going that long. They can't afford to take them to trial. We'll talk a lot more about that in the next chapter. But you also have the right to counsel. Again, not in a civil case, but criminal defendants, they have the right to representation. That's where our Department of Public Advocates come in for assistance of counsel for people who cannot afford an attorney otherwise. All right, point G, the Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. That's where the arguments come down as to whether the death penalty, is it cruel and unusual punishment? What is cruel and unusual? And that's a fact question. Point H, the 10th Amendment states that powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved for the states. Powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved for the states. This ties back in with the Commerce Clause, because this amendment states that if the federal government, if the laws do not say that the federal government can specifically do something, then that is up to the states to do that. Well, that's where it gets heated on the Commerce Clause, where the Supreme Court said, okay, well, if even if commerce within your state affects commerce outside of your state, then it can still be regulated by the federal government. Well, they hang their hat on, people against that interpretation of the Commerce Clause, hang their hat on this amendment and say, no. If it's a power that's not specifically given to the federal government, then it's reserved to the states. So you'll see, again, that's why attorneys have jobs. And then I just put a note there that even though it's not part of the Bill of Rights, the 14th Amendment, it also guarantees due process and equal protection. So remember, when we talk about due process, we mean that you're not going to be deprived of your life, your liberty, your property, without your day in court, without due process of law, without all of the procedural laws being followed in order to strip you of your rights. You have that opportunity for due process. And then equal protection. That's requiring the government to treat similarly situated people in a similar manner. All right, so equal protection in the 14th Amendment states that the state government has to treat similarly situated people in similar circumstances in a similar manner. They can't pick and choose. All right, so that wraps up Chapter 1. In class, we will go over the very important highlighted stuff that I have that I want you to know, not only in life, but also for tests. I know you're students, and that's important. What do I need to know for the test? So we'll go over that. We'll talk a little bit more about the First Amendment, specifically the freedom of speech, and kind of talk about some examples of that. If you can't make it to class, email me with any questions that you have. I hope this lecture video's helped. And that's a wrap for Chapter 1. All right, see you later.